Spellements! Did I scare you? I hope not. Welcome everyone to another Wizard101 video. I'm your host, the Frenzy Gamer, and I want to talk about the elephant in the room, known as Spellements, and why it sucks to farm them. And this is in a way in response to a good buddy of mine, IceGold, who talked about the barrier to entry of PvP getting a lot worse now. And I have to agree with him, and I specifically just want to talk about the Spellements portion, as I've converted now to more of a casual player, someone who does PvE. I've been doing this for a while now as a casual player, and I want to talk about the problems with it, why they're problems, and find some potential solutions in this video. So let's talk about the set of issues that come with Spellement farming. Now, level gating isn't necessarily, I would say, an issue, or at least not a big one. I just feel like this is something that really shouldn't have been a thing in the first place to be a requirement in order for your max level wizard to be able to farm with lower level wizards and farm lower level content just to get specific Spellements so you can, you know, perform a little bit better in different modes of content. Like, I found the idea really stupid in my opinion, but it is what it is. You know, the fact that you do have this feature is nice, I suppose, but it's a feature of something that really shouldn't have been a thing. And for those who are wondering, level scaling just recently came with, I believe, a spring update that's fairly recent, where you're able to interact with the scales of knowledge. Now, I believe it starts maybe in Dragonspire. I'm not sure if it's for any worlds other than Dragonspire in rank 1, but simply just interact with this little guy, and then you scale your level here, and it gives you the elixir that I have right now. You can remove it at any time. It doesn't really cost you anything, so that's great. A lot of these issues that we're going to be discussing is definitely going to be boiled down to, okay, you have way too many restrictions in order for me to farm a reagent, basically is what it is, but for a card. So the next issue is the cantrips. Cantrips is definitely an issue, mainly because it uses an energy, which is a resource that is very valuable. It's used very often for a multitude of different types of content. It's used for pet training, gardening, it's used for fishing, and also it's used for raids. So there's a lot of uses for this system, and it's quite unfortunate that it requires energy. But it's not just the fact that it requires energy. Like, you know, you can probably reserve some energy for yourself for sure. It's really the method of doing cantrip farming is basically you yourself getting two other players or friends of yours, and simply just keep walking around, boom, collect, boom, collect, boom, collect. It's just not really fun. It's very tedious, and basically finding that time, because there's so many Spellements that you have to collect in order for you to max out those Spellements. It would be nice if there were more cantrip chests available through other means, not just, you know, walking around as you're exploring. It should be a thing that is available, sure, but the fact that it's the main way for you to utilize these cantrip chests is kind of annoying. And we'll talk about that later. Guilds is another issue that stems from the issues with Spellement farming, because with guilds, there now is a system where you're actually able to get yourself a raid key. Well, not necessarily a raid key, but rather a key that's similar to raids, except it's in the version of, hey, it's a gold skeleton key. So all the gold skeleton key bosses currently are now available through a portal, just like it would a raid, and you could just get a group of people to farm it for a specific period of time. I believe it's usually like an hour or like an hour and a half, and you can get as much Spellements as you can within that time limit. That's really dope. That's awesome. The only problem is that it's only for a very small portion of players. One can even argue it's like for the 1% of players that actually are in guilds and do participate in guilds. And the issue that stems is really just the guild cooldown, and how the lack of the guild size that could be available really just pushes people away from a guild, because usually the members that are within the guild will have to be members that will have to treat the guild activities as a part-time job but without the pay. It's just not great. Gold keys also tends to be another issue, because what King's Isle did is they wanted to quote-unquote give value to gold skeleton keys. What they simply did instead was make them more tedious to obtain, to the point where it's just not worth the time. So there are a couple of ways to obtain gold skeleton keys. There's no denying it. I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist. It does, but they have their own set of issues. A lot of it dealing with, you know, having to be very consistent, and just happens to be quite a waste of time when it comes towards your quality of life, is how I would like to put it. So there's the crafting method, but the problem with this is that it uses resources meant to improve your odds in Beast Moon and Decathlon. For Beast Moon, it will be like unlocking your forms and upgrading their tiers so they get access to more spells, more deck space, etc, etc. And for Decathlon is, you know, stronger decks, so you can do better within the tower. Portal Apparel, which is loaded with a lot of bugs, but the other issue stems from how other rewards that give something similar to what you're looking for when trying to obtain a gold skeleton key just tends to be a lot better in value. Events is another one where I mentioned before that it's just not worth the time. It's tedious and requires full consistency because it is the final reward. And if you want to do this efficiently, you gotta do it on multiple characters. You can't just do it on one, because if you do it on one, that just means throughout a whole week, you only get one key. So you might as well do it on a couple characters, but that just takes up way too much time. And also there's the daily assignments method, which unfortunately there's only one instance of it, being day 15. You may have noticed that like the daily assignments have 3 different days where you get chests, and that's like day 5, day 10. But day 15 is the only day where you can actually get yourself a gold skeleton key. And it's unfortunate, you know, there should have been more instances where you can get some. Like, you could have just had it where day 5, 10, and 15 give gold skeleton keys, and that would be a lot better, in my personal opinion. But, yeah, it's just lots of issues, along with the fact that Spellements themselves also tend to be very expensive. So, normally, it would be around 720 in order for yourself to upgrade a spell from its base tier all the way towards its max tier. Now, 35 of that is just to unlock the spell only. So if we're talking about the trained spells, you don't need Spellements for them to just, you know, obtain the spell in the first place. So that saves you 35, but you still have to deal with 685 that remains afterwards. With lore spells, you do need the full 720, unless you happen to get lucky and got the spell from Lore Master originally before Spellements became a thing. And also, I believe, Headless Horseman, which I think still is droppable from lore via spell rather than Spellement. And there's also an issue potentially of an overabundance of Spellements, where you can probably have way too many of them, like I have right here with my Locust Swarm, and unless somehow you want to utilize Locust Swarm on another wizard, well, it's just really going to take up space for no apparent reason, so it kind of just destroys the value of the Spellement. So those are just a couple of issues that come with Spellements, and why the farming just doesn't really feel satisfying. And now let's talk about potential solutions. So one of the solutions I have is about cantrips. For cantrips, you can have it to where the chests can be dropped within regular fights and have them guaranteed drops during boss fights. This would be specifically meant for people who do questing in groups. This would be something that will promote questing buddies, and you'll still get some rewards along the way. You can actually utilize your energy now, because now you have the chance of, hey, you know, if we're questing together, you know, we have a cantrip chest, let's all go ahead, use cantrips on that chest and unlock some extra free rewards. You know, there's no harm in getting yourself the free rewards. It's right there. If you have the resources, go ahead and use them. When you're questing throughout the spiral and you level up, you're going to be regaining back your energy again. So there's no reason for you to not use your energy at this point beyond just pet training. For guilds, I would say definitely focus more on inclusivity rather than exclusivity for having more people in guilds, basically. So by doing that, you would increase the guild size and either remove the cooldown, or you can just have it where it's significantly lower. And along with it, you can have a form of an invite system where players who get invited into a guild can temporarily join the guild, which this will help beyond just for having someone to be able to do and utilize the feature of the gold key boss portal feature in guilds, but also it will help with the 12 player requirement when it comes towards raids. It's really hard to schedule around people within the guild, like basically 11 people if you include yourself, if you don't include yourself, in order for a raid to happen in the first place. So having someone who's like maybe outside of your guild but happens to have the availability to invite them over to fill up for that specific spot, and you have a better likelihood of fulfilling that 12 player requirement. And the next thing will be the key conversion idea. This was actually mentioned through a roundtable I did with Val and Zepha with the developers. I believe Cam brought up an idea of having keys of lower rank to be dropped. So we're talking about stone keys and wooden keys. And with that, you can have it to where there are recipes available to use those specific keys to create gold keys. And I thought that was a really phenomenal idea, because now that will open up to the farming method that we had before. Ideally, it would be nice if we just got gold keys farming back like how it used to be, but a little bit of a compromise where we can still have some sort of farming method. You can still have it to maybe a gold key can drop, but have it to where, you know, the lower tier keys will be dropped and there will be recipes available to create those into the gold keys that we need. That's a pretty good compromise. The final solution I have is going to be the Spellement conversion idea. So let's talk about this for a second, because it's going to be a little difficult to kind of explain here. You notice how some of my spells here are over the max amount here? You realize that there's an issue of, man, this is practically useless now, because I don't really want to give this to another wizard. I don't really need it for another wizard. I need it specifically for my balance. My job here is done, and I don't know what to do with this extra set of Spellements. Well, let me give you the idea of the Spiral, Dust, and Spellement discard mechanic. A little bit of context for this mechanic. This actually comes from an idea that happens in Honkai Star Rail, a gacha game that I played. Now, Honkai Star Rail had a system back then where you obtain yourself trace material without farming, known as the supply material box. Now, traces are material, or trace materials are used to upgrade traces. Traces themselves are permanent stat and ability upgrades for characters. So you can see why it's very important. And the supply box allow for players to select a material from 7 different paths. From, you know, one character can follow one path and another one can follow a totally different path, but there's 7 of them in total. However, over time, the developers decided that, hey, it'd probably be better to give players an option for a universal material. And the reason for this is because in Honkai Star Rail, it's kind of ideal to have a multitude of different types of teams to complete specific types of endgame content. And so, knowing this, they found that the supply material box can be very limiting in terms of players wanting to build a specific set of characters. Not to mention the abundance of options for you to select a specific trace material can be a little overwhelming for players. So they decided, let's just do it universal and have what's now called the Tiers of Dreams, which is just a universal source in order for you to upgrade traces of characters. So we're having a similar idea here in Wiz, is what I'm trying to present here. How will it work in Wiz? Well, Spiral Dust can be obtained through a variety of different means. You can either get it through specific events, so like maybe you can get it through like Spiral Showcase or something. Maybe you can get it through like daily assignments as a reward. and you can also get it via a Scroll of Fortune. Like if you happen to purchase Scroll of Fortune, maybe there could be some free ones and some extra ones if you pay. But most importantly, there will be a feature known as the Spellement discard. Now, it's kind of like how it is for your reagents here. You know, you have your reagents, you have one that's an overabundance, and you decide to just go ahead and destroy that reagent. Now, what it will do is, instead of destroying the reagent here, so in this case, we'll be in the Spellements tab here, instead of just destroying that Spellement that you don't want, it's going to instead convert it into spiral dust. And we're going to have this be based on lore spells and train spells. So, lore spells are going to be, you know, just what they say, lore spells. Spells that you basically get from lore. You know, the ones that require the school pips and all that. The train spells are going to be spells that you get normally, you know, by training them, of course. And this also includes the Beastmoon spells. This includes spells that you do quests for. So, like, you know, like Old One's endgame will be considered a train spell because you do technically train it through questing. And that is going to be the differentiation between those two types of spells. One thing I didn't mention earlier is obviously Beastmoon spells that are locked behind Beastmoon should be made available through a variety of other means, including this method we're talking about right now. So, like I mentioned before, so we can get back on topic, simply discard a Spellement and it will turn into spiral dust. But how exactly will that work? Well, we're going to have it to where lore spells will cost a total of 4 spiral dust. So if you were to want to, say, max out a lore spell, you would need a total of around like 2.8k spiral dust, which will be pretty decent to get if you happen to farm for Spellements. Doesn't matter the type, because remember, you're converting this into a universal Spellement that works for any spell. It's just that the amount to convert this amount of the universal reagent into one Spellement is going to differ. So for a lore spell, one Spellement is going to be equivalent to a cost of 4 spiral dust. But when it comes towards refunding it, let's say you had an abundance of a lore Spellement, or maybe it's a lore Spellement you don't want. Like, let's say you were farming King Boar. You know, it drops Relator Scars, Spellements, Grendel's Amends, and Hammer of Thor. Let's say you wanted to just max out Relator Scar's spin, and you didn't care for Hammer of Thor and Grendel's Amends. Well, you can refund the ones you don't want, and each Spellement of it will give you 2 spiral dust each. So, let's say you had 20 of the ones you don't want, you'll be getting a total of 40 spiral dust, which would basically, with the conversion of, you know, 4 spiral dust per one Spellement, you get a total of 10 Spellements for that specific spell that you wanted. Now, it may not necessarily sound like a lot, but this is a feature that will add over time, especially if you're someone who farms Spellements not in a hardcore sense, even though that will help a lot, but rather having something like a retriever, or maybe with the added other features that I suggested, you're going to be given more opportunities of attaining Spellements, and you can train to what your heart desires, basically. Now, what about the train spells? Train spells will be 1 Spellement will equate to a use of 2 spiral dust. And when it comes to refunding them, if you wanted to remove some Spellements from the train spells, you will discard 1 Spellement and it will give you back 1 spiral dust. And that's the idea I had for the Spellement conversion system. I feel like this will be really nice to have because it adds convenience to the player, and it will actually give every Spellement that you get worth of value. And there is no longer such a thing as overabundance of Spellements. There will always be new spells. There will always, you know, be new train spells, new lore spells, and you're going to be given lots of opportunities to utilize Spellements if we go with a system where we can discard the Spellements that we don't want into Spellements that we do want via a universal reagent that it's meant specifically for Spellements. With that being said, I will be leaving the video here. Again, thank you to everyone who watched. I hope that I explained these things relatively well. And as always, to everyone who is watching, remember to stay frenzy and peace.